Welcome to Avatar State of Mind, a podcast exclusively dedicated to the universe of Avatar The Last Airbender. From The Last Airbender to The Legend of Korra, the comic books, the Kyoshi novels, this is your number one stop for Avatar content. My name is Sam DeCoste, and I'm joined by Aaron Miller to spend the next 30 minutes with you talking about the Avatar universe. From the Northern Water Tribe to Ba Sing Se and Zuko's honor, of course, we've got you covered. This is Avatar State of Mind. Welcome back to Avatar State of Mind. This is episode 10 of the podcast. This is Sam DeCoste speaking with Aaron Miller. Aaron, it's great to see you on Zoom tonight.
Yeah, this is a change of pace, change of style, but it's definitely going to be the same enjoyable podcast that we've always done. So
I miss you dearly, but I'm happy to do it in this format.
I mean, at least we can see each other face to face with this wonderful technology.
Yes, and this Zoom technology will definitely make the editing much more user-friendly for yours truly. Pick up what I'm saying.
I do pick it up.
But let's push forward with our Avatar review. We will continue our series-long recap of Avatar The Last Airbender by spending each podcast talking about individual chapters, breaking down every chapter of Avatar in order from books 1 to 3, from The Boy in the Iceberg to Sozin's Comet. Previously on Avatar State of Mind, we talked about the Blue Spirit and the Fortune Teller. Next up, we're talking about episodes 15 and 16 in Book 1, Bato of the Water Tribe and the Deserter. Before you listen any longer, let this be your spoiler warning. Do not listen to the show today unless you have watched the first 16 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender. Ideally, the whole show, but if you haven't watched the whole show at this point, you're kind of in too deep to do that, so whatever. But let's talk about Bato of the Water Tribe. This is really all about Sokka and his backstory, because really we've learned a lot about Aang and how he ran away, Zuko and how he's trying to find redemption, and even Katara to an extent, and how Aang represents her, a symbol of hope for her and the rest of the world. But finally we learned about Sokka and his connection to his father, and this really brings it to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the background that this episode establishes, like with the Water Tribe itself, and like the weapons they use, the ships they use, and even the people. Because I mean, this is the first episode that we actually see like a grown male figure of the Water Tribe, like in action and like as a person. Like even with the hut that they go into, like it's really cool to see like where Sokka and Katara are actually from.
The episode begins with Sokka identifying a Water Tribe weapon, a sword made out of a whale's tooth. So it's easy to tell from this episode that the Water Tribe is a little barbaric with how they make shift, whether it's a carpet in a hut or a weapon. They love to use animal fur and teeth and stuff like that.
And I mean, that in itself, Aang is very much against that. I mean, the air nomads themselves are against using an animal, like eating an animal, using it as like weapons or anything. So you can see the contrast between two cultures right there.
And in the beginning of the episode, Sokka is able to identify that there was a battle that took place with Water Tribe warriors and how they drove a flock of firebenders out of a campsite. And then we flash back to Sokka the day that his father left the South Pole, how Sokka was desperate to follow them and go with them and fight with them. And Sokka was saying, I'm a warrior, I can fight, please don't leave me. And that's when we finally meet Katara and Sokka's father, Hakoda, who says to him, being a man is knowing where you're needed most. And where he's needed the most is not in battle, it's protecting his sister and protecting the women in the South Pole. And that really was the truth, because Sokka really was the rock of the South Pole when they were gone. And we finally see the day that he was left behind, and we see the growth that he's been able to go through in those past few years.
Honestly, I think that when Hakoda gave Sokka like that role when he left, was probably like the foundation Sokka used to become like this cunning warrior, like become like this confident person, even though he's not so confident in certain regards. But I feel like before his dad left, Sokka had zero confidence. He relied on his father. And now he understood how to live by himself and protect other people before himself.
So then Sokka and Team Avatar find Bato, who is a man who was actually on Hakoda's fleet and the army that left the South Pole years ago to go fight the Fire Nation and help in the war. Bato was wounded, and that's why that he's separate from everyone else. And they take Team Avatar to an abbey where sisters took care of him and they healed him. And it's, in a way, it's a family reunion. It's Sokka and Katara asking Bato about the war stories that they have and talking about the heroics of Hakoda and what they've gone through since they left the South Pole. It is a family reunion, but it's one that Aang really can't participate in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole plot of this entire episode. I mean, not the entire, but most of it. I mean, Aang showing that he isn't as trustworthy as an Avatar should be. And I mean, like during this entire episode, there's jokes poked at him saying like, even when Aang got like the award for being most trustworthy, like all that stuff was, I think this was honestly like this episode is about Sokka, but it was also a huge learning lesson for Aang during the process.
Throughout this whole process, Aang kind of feels like dead weight when they're reminiscing about war stories and talking about family and the Water Tribe. Aang can't really connect to any of this because he's not a member of their family. In my opinion, Aang is really making this all about himself very unfairly because this is not about him. He's inserting himself into a family situation, and in the end, he takes it too far.
Yeah, I mean, Aang is used to the attention being on him because he's the Avatar. I mean, in previous episodes, when he went to Kyoshi Island, for example, or the one by Kyoshi Island, whatever it was called, he was praised. Everybody was like so happy to see him. Even like wherever he goes, everybody wants to see the Avatar. They don't want to see Sokka or Katara. So finally, somebody wanted to see Sokka and Katara and not the Avatar. So Aang was jealous of that.
And then he takes it to an extreme when they learn that Bato is expecting a message from Hakoda looking for a rendezvous point where he can reunite with the rest of the fleet. And that's when Sokka and Katara are offered the chance to join him and reunite with their father and help them, well, in their efforts against the Fire Nation in the war. Aang left before they basically told Bato they need to travel with Aang again to the North Pole. But Aang leaves feeling that they're going to leave him. And then an Earth Kingdom messenger comes in with a map of the rendezvous point, and Aang just takes it and puts it in his shirt and doesn't tell them that they got the message. And I think he's wildly overreacting. He's assuming they're going to leave them, that they're going to leave Aang, even though that's not the case. And even if that was the case, he's holding them back from, well, for Sokka at least, reuniting with his father, who we're learning a lot about in this episode and how strong of a connection that he has to him.
I mean, so after watching this episode again today, I finally picked up on the fact that after Aang left the tent and he went right before he met the Earth Kingdom messenger, Katara and Sokka told Batu that they couldn't go. Like they had to go with Aang to the North Pole. They had to continue with him. And Aang didn't know this because he left before they said that. If Aang would have just had patience and stayed around, all of this really wouldn't have happened.
And then we see Bato teaching Sokka a Water Tribe rite of passage, the ice dodging, which is actually really cool. It's a really interesting tradition, a traditional rite of passage for young waterbenders. Sokka never got to do it because Hakoda left before he was old enough, and there was not another man in the Water Tribe to do it with him. And then Sokka did it. And I'm not sure the statistics of how young waterbenders in the South Pole are able to do it on their first try, but in Sokka's first try, he nails it. He absolutely nails it.
I mean, this instance in this episode showed Sokka's mastery at being a leader. It showed how smart he was and like what he had to do to keep everybody alive. Because I mean, honestly, I feel like this like ice dodging mission for people in the Water Tribe is meant to, first of all, challenge them. But if they fail, I imagine they probably die because like imagine crashing into ice, you're gonna sink and you're gonna drown, or even worse. But like the way that Sokka just easily took control of the moment, and like, I mean, it was crazy because as soon as he saw that there were rocks, even Batu was like, "Don't go, you can't do this." And all of a sudden, Sokka's like, "Yeah, just waterbend, put air in the sails, and we'll go right over it." And they did. So Sokka is such a smart guy, and I think this episode starts his climb up to become the leader of the gang.
I think it's also really funny how the Water Tribe rite of passage is pretty much sailing the Titanic. That's pretty much what they're asking them to do. But you're right. This is really what kickstarts Sokka's development as an intellectual, because it's the brains that he contributes to Team Avatar, and that's why they are so strong as a team, because he is always one step ahead, and he always knows what to do. When they finish the rite of passage, Sokka, he earns the mark of the wise, Katara earns the mark of the brave, and then, of course, the writers had to slip in Aang getting the mark of the trusted and is deemed an honorary member of the Water Tribe. And that was what guilted Aang into turning over the note with the map to Hakoda. And Sokka becomes furious and infuriated when he sees that Aang was keeping Sokka from really reuniting with his father. And it's such an incredible indictment on Aang that he did this to Sokka and Katara. And Sokka convinced Katara to run off with them. And at one point, that was going to be it. That was friendship over. It was, Aang, get to the North Pole by yourself. You are on your own now.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as Aang put the map in his shirt, I knew something bad was going to happen. And honestly, I'm surprised that Aang even felt guilt and pulled it back out, and gave it back to Sokka, because Sokka and Katara, as they said in the tent after Aang left, their plan was to continue to the North Pole. Their plan was not to go see their father until after they helped Aang, but because of Aang's disloyalty to Sokka and Katara, it triggered them to just want to give up on Aang. I mean, even Hakoda and the women in the village where not Hakoda, Batu, where you were staying, even the woman was like, "Okay, it's time to go." Like, nobody wanted to see Aang after his showing of disloyalty.
Ultimately, even though Sokka and Katara do leave, they end up changing their mind, realizing that Aang would be a wolf separated from his pack if they just abandoned him. And they realized they couldn't abandon Aang. They couldn't abandon their mission to help the Avatar master waterbending and ultimately help him defeat the Fire Lord. But then we intersect with the other storyline of this episode, which is Zuko and Iroh hunting down Aang with the help of this girl named June and her beast that can track anyone a continent away based off a scent, which is magnificent. I can't imagine there are many beasts in this universe that can do anything like that. But they find her because June actually searches for a stowaway on Zuko's ship at the very beginning of the episode, and that was what enticed Zuko to not politely ask her, but to pretty much force her to track Katara with her necklace.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that June ran into Zuko and Iroh was probably 1 in a billion, because of the fact of how rare the animals, the Shurshoos, actually are. So in the Kyoshi novels, actually, the Shurshoos are mentioned a lot. Avatar Kyoshi was actually hunted by Shurshoos at one point by somebody who wanted to capture her. I don't want to spoil any of the book for Sam and also for some of the listeners. But Shurshoos were very, very popular like 300 to 400 years ago, mainly only in the Earth Kingdom. They're not really anywhere else, just in the Earth Kingdom. But they were actually hunted and killed, and there weren't many left. I honestly think there were like 1 or 2 in the time of Aang. So the fact that June had one and they just coincidentally ran into Iroh and Zuko, it's kind of crazy. And it's so interesting because, like you said, no other animal in this entire universe is probably like this thing.
And I'm sure we talked about this many episodes ago. We knew at the end of episode 6, when Zuko finds Katara's necklace, that it would come into play at some point. And this is really where it comes to the forefront, how he uses it to pretty much find her. Never mind just bribe Katara back when they encountered the pirates, but actually use it to track her down and reliving the events of the past 2 episodes when they visit the medicine worker with Miyuki the cat, or going back to Aunt Wu and having Aunt Wu hitting on Uncle Iroh. This is a great moment for Iroh, who really seems like he feels really high on himself today, because he's talking to Aunt Wu, and Aunt Wu's saying, "Oh, hello, handsome. Do you want to hear your fortunes?" And then he's with this June lady who you could tell he's infatuated with. Good day for Iroh.
I mean, the interactions Iroh, in my notes I have right in front of me, I have Iroh is weird. Like the interactions he was having with June, especially, like, holy crap. Like even like later in the episode when she's like laying on him, like he fakes to be paralyzed so she could stay on him. But I want to go back to when Aunt Wu tried to give Iroh his fortune, and Iroh's like, no, like I don't want a fortune. There's only one more big surprise in my life, and I don't want to know about that, meaning like when he's going to die. And I loved that line so much, just because of the original voice actor who did it, the original voice actor of Iroh unfortunately died in between season 1 and book 1 and book 2 when they were doing the filming for voice actors, or recordings, I guess. So the fact that they had the original guy say this, who then died, it's just crazy. I mean, you have to be like a diehard Avatar fan to like pick up on something like that and like see the connection. But it's just saddening that unfortunately he said that and then he did die soon after.
That is a really good connection. I did catch that quote from Iroh, and it shows how he's really beyond his years and how he doesn't even consider for one moment listening to his fortunes, because he doesn't want to ruin the element of surprise and excitement in his life. But ultimately, June does track Katara with the necklace sent, and they go after Aang thereafter, and they paralyze Katara and Sokka. Zuko is upset that Aang was not with them and doesn't buy when Sokka says we split off from Aang, because why would you buy that? But then after this great battle in the Abbey, Aang and Team Avatar actually outsmart the beast by dumping out barrels of perfume, because this beast can track scents. So if you give him a lot to smell, then he's not going to know what to see. And then that ultimately leads to the paralyzation of Zuko and Iroh, and not Iroh, but June. And that's what wins them the day. So really, and this comes into how Sokka's intelligence is getting them one step ahead again. Sokka has the frame of mind to give this beast plenty to look at, and that's what ultimately won the day for Team Avatar.
Can we also just say that without Appa in this fight, I don't think any of them would be alive. Like the heroics of Appa in this episode, like Appa was taking like slashes from the Shirshu, like every once in a while, to the back, to the front. Like, and the thing is typically when you get slashed by one of those, you're instantly paralyzed for a given amount of time. And Appa took, I think, like I was counting 4 or 5 of them before he was fully down. And like Appa basically put himself in between June and the Shirshu and Aang. And if Appa wasn't there, who knows if Aang would have been hit by it and taken down.
We never really see Appa engage in combat, but he was holding his own. He couldn't do much because the Shirshu was so powerful, and he took so many shots that ultimately he went down. But Appa engaging in combat, that's when you really get excited. That gets you on the edge of your seat. We also got to see another one-on-one duel between Zuko and Aang, which honestly showed Aang to be this far superior bender once again. Zuko is just so far off pace of where Aang is at this point in their lives.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's nuts. It's crazy, but the difference there.
And the episode caps off, basically Aang is accepted as a member of Katara and Sokka's family, and Aang needs them more than Katara and Sokka need their own family right now. And their strength and courage to do that, with the opportunity to see their father on a silver platter, they decide to turn it down and travel with the Avatar and help him learn waterbending, traveling across the world and pretty much finishing what they started from the South Pole, going all the way to the North Pole. We finally see Katara get her necklace back, and Aang is the one to give it to her. And that spices up the romance story a little bit more because Katara gets another smooch in for Aang. But yeah, enough with the smooches, unless you want to say anything about that, Aaron.
No, I mean, every once in a while you see Katara kiss Aang, and then I don't know. Of course, it builds up to what eventually happens. No spoilers here. But if you've watched these episodes so far, you can just imagine what it turns into. I mean, as a kid, I always got weirded out whenever they would kiss and like one of them would get like one of them would blush, but it builds up. It adds an extra layer to the story than just like the fighting and progressing through the elements.
Moving on, let's talk about The Deserter, which is a pretty good episode.
The Deserter is in. I don't think I said it was in my top 5, but I think it's number 6 actually.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's such a fantastic episode. Like, if the first time you watch it, I feel like it's a standard episode. But if you watch it through and through again, like while also seeing other episodes and seeing the connections, this episode was masterfully created. Like it was a perfect episode.
The way it starts, you're talking about an exhibition of Fire Nation culture. We're going to the Fire Days Festival, a cultural exhibit of the Fire Nation, and it's Aang's opportunity to observe firebenders from up close. Although we also see wanted posters, and obviously there's one of Aang. It's kind of funny how the Fire Nation's greatest threat and the X factor of the 100-Year War is you have a wanted poster, as if Aang is just some bandit criminal. But he's the Avatar. He's the most powerful bender in the world. And you have wanted posters all over the Fire Nation looking for this man, as if bounty hunters are going to find him and turn him in for a big pot of gold.
Yeah, I mean, his wanted poster was also right next to the Blue Spirit, which is Zuko. It was next to, like, even Zhang Zhang was on there. Like, some people who are almost impossible to catch, there's just random bounty posters. It's kind of hilarious.
So they go in to watch firebenders up close. It's actually a masquerade festival of sorts. Everyone has to wear a facial mask, and Aang and gang actually buy masks for all for themselves. And then they find a performer, a magician of sorts. He's saying, "Oh no, this dragon beast is too uncontrollable," even though it was all under control and it was all just part of the performance and all part of the bit. Aang swoops in when Katara's on stage, looking like she's about to get burned, and then Aang airbends in front of hundreds of firebenders, and then he's busted as the Avatar, and now they're in a high-speed chase to get out of the Fire Nation. And then this mysterious hooded man comes and saves them and leads them out of the festival and tells them that he followed Team Avatar because he wants to send them to Zhang Zhang, who used to be a Fire Nation high-ranking member of either the army or I'm assuming it's the Fire Nation army. He was a former general, although even the man who was deserting the Fire Nation didn't even know what his position was. I thought that was also interesting. But he helps them escape, and he wants to take them to Zhang Zhang so Zhang Zhang could teach Aang how to firebend, because as we know, Aaron, all firebenders are evil. Every single one of them, right?
Yeah, of course. Until this guy we see, right?
Oh, yes, of course. Now we finally know a good firebender. But then when we meet Zhang Zhang, it turns out that Zhang Zhang said Aang never should have come here. And he can tell without even talking to him that Aang didn't actually master water or earth. And he says you have to master water and earth before you can learn fire, because water is life, earth is hard, but fire breathes, fire is alive, and it destroys everything in its path if one does not have the will to control it. And he says Aang is too weak. He is too weak to learn them because he has not learned water or earth yet, and he's too undisciplined to bother. And then what happens, Aaron?
And then Roku just appears out of nowhere, and I think it was kind of funny. All of a sudden, Zhang Zhang's like, Roku. Like it was like a meeting between old friends, even though Roku was alive so much longer, so much far back than Zhang Zhang was. And then honestly, like Zhang Zhang was in shock that this actually happened. But as soon as Zhang Zhang agreed to do it, Aang's like, great, let's go. Let's start now. Like Roku just disappeared immediately. Like it was kind of funny how that happened.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
This I didn't think of this until I watched it this time around. I've seen this episode so many times, but when I watched it for the last time, I was thinking, is it possible that Avatar Roku did not actually appear through Aang? What if it was just an imagination reflex from Zhong? Because Aang didn't know. As far as Aang could tell, nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
What if Zhong just imagined it? What do you think?
I mean, it's definitely a possibility. I never thought of it that way. The way that I was thinking about it is so like this interaction confused me just to begin with in regard to Roku like pushing Zhong to teach Aang firebending, even though it's out of order. I mean, technically, there's no order to fire to understanding the elements. I mean, like there's like this preconceived like you have to do this, and that. Even looking back to the Kyoshi novels, like Avatar Kyoshi, like she wanted to learn them out of order, but she found out that if you try to learn them out of order, it actually like messes up with like your chi patterns and like all that, your chakras and all that stuff. So the fact that Roku was like encouraging Aang to learn firebending before water and earth didn't make much sense to me. So when you say that Zhang could have imagined this, I'm kind of liking that because I don't see why Roku would even come through Aang to like break the rules, basically.
And you were just talking about that. I definitely do think that you really, if you're Aang, you can't learn fire before you learn water and earth, because Aang did need to learn how to control fire before learning it. And obviously, we could talk about this a little bit now because Zhong does agree to teach Aang, but his teaching ways are rather dated, I guess is the term that you could use, because Aang is taught to sit in a stance and concentrate and feel the energy of the sun and feel the heat of the greatest source of fire in the world. You have Katara and Sokka laughing at Aang for the situation that he's in. You have Aang walking to a mountaintop just to assume his stance and breathe and just feel the heat of the sun from a higher elevation point, leaving him for hours to do it. Zhong saying, "Why are you back now? You should be still on the mountaintop feeling the heat of the sun." But Zhong is trying to instill into Aang that fire's nature is to consume and destroy. And if a bender doesn't know how to control it, it will risk destroying yourself and everyone you love. And Aang, we learn in this episode, because it never really comes to the forefront until now, Aang does not have discipline. He is not very disciplined, maybe not in his bending, because as an airbender, he is a very disciplined bender, and air nomads in general are just so gentle and so wholesomely natured. But when it comes to fire and the opportunity to learn firebending, Aang uncharacteristically has no discipline whatsoever or any respect for a firebending master.
I mean, I absolutely love the way you worded Zhong's teaching as being an older way of teaching, because that actually is very, very true. It is a very much older. Before the war, this was actually the way of teaching firebending. So like a fun fact from the Kyoshi novels. So Kyoshi's firebending teacher, Rangi, don't know how to pronounce it exactly, who's actually Kyoshi's girlfriend as well. She makes Kyoshi go into these stances every single morning. She makes Kyoshi climb mountains. She makes her teaching of firebending 400 years before Aang is the same exact way Zhong is trying to teach Aang firebending. So you were absolutely correct in regard to Zhong's teaching being old. I mean, he's such a classic firebender, and honestly, nobody else in the current universe teaches the way he teaches, maybe except for like the Sun Warriors who we see in book 3. I mean, all firebenders want to learn through rage, but Zhong teaches through his breath and through control.
Or maybe fire is just boring. Maybe firebending is just boring.
I don't know. I know in the first episode we said that we will never ever talk about the live action movie, but I think if the live action movie had one good thing to it, it was that firebenders had to have a fire source to be able to firebend. I kind of like that. And I mean, I don't know. I think firebenders are kind of overpowered with being able just to make fire out of their hand. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it is. I mean, when you think about all the other elements, if you're an earthbender, you need earth. And we see it imprisoned when you get rid of the earth and rocks, earthbenders are starved of anything to bend. When you talk about water bending, you need a source of water to bend. You can go into the most minute resources of water you like in the world, but if you don't have water, you can't bend. Air is everywhere. So of course you can bend air anytime you want. But fire, the idea of breathing fire, the idea of sparking fire in your hand, the idea of punching fire out of your fist, that does seem a little broken.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think it seems so broken, and it makes sense that it is, because firebenders, especially in this time, use their rage to create the flame. I mean, much later in the show, we actually see a certain character have to relearn firebending because that person is changing from something to something else, so they have to change the way they firebend. So honestly, like, the rage coming out as fire makes sense to me. Like, that's the only reason why I think that firebenders having the ability to firebend makes sense at all, just because of how angry they always are.
Now let's go back to the story, because Aang is growing very frustrated with Zhong Zhong and how slow he's going as a teacher. But then when Zhong Zhong has to leave, Aang manages to generate fire from a burning leaf and becomes cocky uncharacteristically. He even tries to juggle it. He's shooting it everywhere, and he gets excited and he just blasts fire all around him, and he actually burns Katara. And then Sokka jumps out of nowhere, sees that his sister just got burned, and flips out. By the way, I also want to point out, we're learning a lot more. I mean, it was much more like this at the very beginning of book 1, but even now, Sokka is very, very protective of Katara. Even when Aang, who is his friend, hurts Katara by accident, Sokka flips out on him.
I mean, in the previous episode that we just covered a few minutes ago, it was Sokka's only mission in life. I mean, maybe 2 missions, but it was probably the mission on the top of his list. It was to protect Katara, no matter what. Like, that's what he had to do for 2 years? For 2 years of his adult life, basically, between 14 and 16, the only thing he had to do was protect Katara. So when all of a sudden she got hurt, I understand why he flipped out.
We see Katara go to the river and and she puts her hands in the water because she's in such pain from the burns. But then she just heals them. Without even doing anything, she just puts her hands in the water and then her burns go away. And Zhong Zhong notices and really envies her ability to heal, saying how he's burdened with this power of being able to destroy everything in a moment's notice. And water is also very powerful, and water is also a potentially very destructive element if used in that way. But water is life. Water is healing. One of the reasons water is so potent as an element is you don't even need to use it in combat. It is used to heal. It's what saves many lives in this show.
Yeah, I mean, healing is such a big factor in this entire show, and I'm surprised that this is the first time it's actually mentioned. 16 episodes in, we finally understand what healing is. I mean, without this healing, this show ends at book 2, book 3. Like, this show ends so early without that big factor. I was very surprised, and I'm actually very happy that Zhong Zhong acknowledged the significance of being able to heal, even though he's a firebender. He's on the opposite side of the spectrum.
And I was just going to bring that up as my next point. Zhong Zhong is a firebender, the polar opposite of waterbending. Yet he appreciates water so much, and he wishes he was a waterbender. He wishes he was blessed with the ability to heal and the ability to bend water, as opposed to being burdened with this power to destroy and consume everything. So then we see Commander Zhao. Not Commander. I should know that he's promoted to Admiral by now. But you see Admiral Zhao just march in and just try to capture the Avatar. But he also sees that Zhong Zhong was there, the deserter, one of the men on the wanted posters, a man who deserted the Fire Nation army, that he can take. So he can double dip and arrest the Avatar and Zhong Zhong and turn in 2 prisoners to the Fire Lord. We also learned that Admiral Zhao was actually one of Zhong Zhong's former students, one that he remembers to this day for lacking discipline and only concerning himself with the power to wipe out his opponent. And that's what Aang uses to outsmart him. Aang doesn't throw a single punch in a fight against Zhao, where Zhao just tries to relentlessly punch fire and destroy Aang, but he destroys his entire fleet of ships and the forest surrounding him.
Yeah, I mean, the patience Aang showed in that fight itself proves that he's such a quick learner. Because, I mean, Zhang Zhang was teaching him this. And even though it didn't seem like Aang was taking in much, he honestly was, maybe subconsciously. So in this fight, he was like, okay, let's let Zhao just destroy everything. And it worked out. Because, I mean, Zhao's rage, I mean, honestly, other than the Fire Lord, I think Zhao is the most like rage filled person. Like his firebending, if he didn't have all that rage, I don't think he'd even be a firebender. Like it's based so much on the fact that he's always angry and always wants more.
No, Zhao is defined by his rage and his anger, and Aang is able to outsmart him completely. It's amazing how Aang doesn't throw a single punch of air, and Zhao destroys everything, but Aang is left unscathed. But even when Zhang Zhang finds Zhao, Zhang Zhang tells Aang, "You're no match for the Avatar. He's never seen such raw power." That's honestly incredible because Zhang Zhang was so critical of Aang in every component of his bending and how he is as an avatar, his discipline. But Zhang Zhang tells Zhao, "You're no match for Aang. He's too powerful. I've never seen such raw power in a bender." That's incredible.
I actually have a question. Like I have a this or that question for you. Do you think Zhang Zhang said this to Zhao just to trick him and like maybe like try to make him back off even before fighting? Or do you think that Zhang Zhang actually thought this because of the fact that Aang turned into Roku and was like, Zhang Zhang saw the power of Aang with his connection to the past lives? Because honestly, like you said, Zhang Zhang previously said in this episode that Aang was weak, and now all of a sudden he thinks he's super powerful. What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe he's really good at manipulation. Maybe he says what the other person doesn't want to hear to scare them and trick them. He tricked Aang. He was criticizing Aang the whole episode for how he lacks restraint and lacks discipline. And really, it taught him a valuable lesson by the end of this episode. And then with Zhao, he realized that he was no match for Aang because Aang has much more discipline than Zhao, which shows how much discipline Zhao lacks.
Mm. I actually kind of like that answer because Zhang Zhang himself is a trickster. Because I mean, he even escaped from Zhao and like what? There were 5 or 6 other firebenders all shooting a fire blast to the center, and Zhang Zhang just disappeared into thin air, and he was basically tricked them and got away. So I like that answer. It was kind of like Zhang Zhang is like a manipulator and a trickster at heart, so he's able to get himself out of situations.
And the last real takeaway of this episode is Aang is so guilt-ridden after he burns Katara that he realizes he never wants to firebend again. And obviously, as the Avatar, he cannot do that. He has to learn firebending. But in this moment, he is so filled with guilt and remorse, he says he will never firebend again. He realizes that he was so undisciplined. He sees the error in his ways, and he sees how reckless he was, and it forces him to an extreme situation where he wants to avoid it at all costs forever.
I mean, as you and I and maybe some listeners know, this moment keeps Aang from firebending for a very, very long time because of the guilt he felt. So, like, this isn't just like this random thing of Aang saying he'll never do anything again. Like, this episode had a lot of consequences on like the way that he viewed firebending as a whole.
It definitely had substantial ramifications throughout the whole series. But that is it for episode 16. That is all for our episode 10 recap. 10 episodes in the books, Aaron. That is very impressive. No one thought we'd make it this far, but here we are.
And honestly, I don't think we would have gotten to 10 as quick. I mean, we missed last week. I think we missed like 2 weeks altogether. So we would be on episode 12, but that's fine because we're gonna come at you guys with a special episode either next week or the week after, whenever we can fit our schedules together. And we're finally going to discuss who would win in a sword fight, Sokka or Zuko. It's 100% Sokka, and I don't care what you say.
Well, you're going to get cooked in that debate. I can't wait for that. But next week you'll hear from us. We will be having a special episode at some point. We'll also march on with our debate not our debate. We'll march on with our episode recap series. Next episode, we'll talk about the Northern Air Temple and the Waterbending Master. We're really getting into the thick of the end of book 1, and things heat up. Even though it's only water, we really heat up at the end of book 1. And I'm excited to talk about these next 2 episodes with you, Aaron.
Yeah, I honestly can't wait. Once we get towards the end of this book and even into the intro of book 2, I think this podcast is really going to take off with our analysis of the individual things. Because book 1 is kind of slow, to be honest. But once we start to get into book 2, I feel like we can really turn the knob.
It's going to be fun. But that is all for episode 10.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind. We will be back next Saturday with another episode of this podcast. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Avatar State of Mind and Twitter at AvatarSOM for more content and to get sneak peeks at episodes before they release. If you have any recommendations for a future episode, please tweet us or comment on any of our Instagram posts. For Sam DeCoste, I am Aaron Miller. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind.